welcome everybody to the Helsinki Distinguished Lecture Series on Future Information Technology. My name is Teemu Ruusa. I'm an associate professor at the Department of Computer Science of the University of Helsinki. I'll just say really a couple of words on our lecture series and basically introduce what this event is about. So we're trying to bring together everyone interested in ICT and its future to these events. And we've had always great speakers. I should just mention that many people might have noticed in the news that actually a Finn, Tuomas Handholm, who's a professor at Carnegie Mellon, was in the news about creating AI that could beat people in human players in poker game. And he happened to be our first speaker in this series a couple of years back. And then we've had other great speakers, and today we have yet another one, and I will give the floor to Giulio Iacucci, my colleague, who will introduce our speaker. So please, Giulio.
Thank you, Teemu. Welcome, everybody. So I'm here to represent important community of people that has been very excited to meet Rosalind. We have a lot of HCI researchers. May I ask how many researchers we have in the room? So it's any researcher. Okay, so but it's quite a heterogeneous crowd, but a good half of it is more on the research side. And one reflection I made following Rosalind's work for some time is how many times does it happen as a researcher that you get to found and create a new field of research and then have impact in many fields beyond maybe just human-computer interaction, also in machine learning, and also create successful commercializations of some of the breakthroughs of the science. So this doesn't happen often, and it's really for us very exciting to be listening today to Professor Rosalind Picard, who's a professor at MIT. She's the founder and leader of the Affective Computing Research Group, and has today, of course, we will hear possibly a bit of snapshots and some stories about what has happened since possibly we have read the book back in '97. I actually now and then encounter nice things such as I discovered that Steve Mann was your student. I encountered this brilliant researcher that was going around with very futuristic wearable computing and doing provocative research, let's say far before we started seeing some Google glasses and things like this. And I'm really looking forward to the talk and to learn more about finally what we can do now with emotional computing. So, Rosalind, please.
moment of anticipation. Oops. All right. I think we're on now. Thank you so much. Nice introduction. I know we have extra wine they bought for after this, too, but I do want you to know that I'm free to take questions in the middle of the talk. I know that's something people may hesitate, but if something's unclear, feel free to raise your hand, and we can take it as we go. I have two disclosures also to mention. While I'm a full professor at MIT, I also have co-founded two companies, Affectiva and Empatica, where I'm a shareholder in. So just so you know, there's that additional interest there. Sound okay? All right, I'm going to start this story with my original interest in building a super intelligent machine. Like many people, when I started out, I was interested in AI and wanting to make machines that were smart. I was working on perceptual intelligence, computer vision, and mathematical models that would allow machines to see and manipulate the content in pictures. Over the winter break, over Christmas one year, I was reading a book on synesthesia, the combination of sound and touch, taste, and vision, and I was surprised to learn that these signals were coming together not in the cortex, which is where we thought all of the intelligent processing was that we should be trying to model and build in our computers, but it was happening deeper in the brain, in regions of the brain that we didn't think had anything to do with intelligence. Regions of the brain involved in emotion, memory, and attention. And when I heard emotion, memory, and attention, I thought, well, memory's important, and attention's important, and I didn't want to have anything to do with emotion. Well, some of you know this story. After a while, I realized that emotion was actually critical for shaping what we paid attention to, and shaping what went into memory, and shaping how we saw all of the input and what to focus on that was most important. And also for action and language and decision and everything in AI, if you made a list, it needed something that was missing. And while we don't know exactly what that is, we knew that emotion was missing and would probably play a key part in that. So I wanted to get other people to work on that. I figured emotion would kill my career as a woman in engineering. So I wrote a book called Affective Computing, mostly to try to get other people to look. It helped to write a book because nobody would publish papers on it at the time, but you could always get a book published. Now, as I did that in the context of the Media Lab, where they're so interested in human-computer interaction, they brought up the obvious thing to me, which is not what I was thinking about at the time, is that our interaction with each other is social-emotional, and that carries over to computers. I think I lost sound there. I can switch to another mic if we need to. So I'll just keep going, play with that. It feels like it's cutting in and out. Make sure all the cables are tight. So anyhow, the last thing the engineers were thinking about was the social-emotional interaction here. And it became clear when people started doing software agents that were supposedly intelligent. Like, I don't know the ages in this room, how many of you knew Clippy, Microsoft Office assistant? I see some. You might, should I just switch? How's this? Is that better? Okay, we'll take this off. So Clippy was something that when they actually said it was going away, Bill Gates got a standing ovation. A lot of people were not happy with Clippy. And I think one reason why is Clippy would come out looking really smiley and happy, but it would come out at a time when you were having a problem, and you look like this. Now, you probably know if you walk into somebody's office when they look like this, and you look smiley and happy, they're not going to be happy to see you act that way, right? when you see them look upset, you should change the way you respond, right? You should stop looking happy. The Germans have a word for that, right? The Schadenfreude, right? I'm happy at your misfortune. And that's not nice. So in order to be truly intelligent, you have to see if the other person is happy or frustrated. And then you respond differently. And then you're perceived as intelligent, likable, and they want to have you come back and interact with them more. By the way, this is not a new insight. This has been around at least thousands of years. You can find this idea in Proverbs. You know, if you're singing happy stuff to somebody who's miserable, you might as well, you know, pour salt in their wound or take away their coat in the cold. It's not a nice thing to do. So how do we give computers the intelligence to know that you are really happy and having a good time, or you're really annoyed or frustrated or bored or some other state? Now, as a computer vision person, we started first looking at things like facial expressions. And one of the things that was a surprise to me, and I wrote about this in a way that if you do have a copy of my book, you'll need to correct this now. I believed what everybody said, which is that this is the true smile of happiness. Those who haven't done facial analysis, they have numbered every one of the action units on your face, each possible piece of an expression that can be made. And this eye crinkle, where you get the little eye wrinkles when you're truly happy and you have a cheek raise, that's action unit 6. And the lip corner pull is 12. If they tell you to smile and you're not happy, right, you just do the 12 and not the 6. But if you're really happy, you do the 6 and the 12, right? You crack a joke. And so Paul Ekman, who's very famous for this, would say the true smile of happiness, if you want to know if somebody's truly happy, is if you see the 6 and the 12. So we believed that until we started getting real-world data. Let me show you an example of how we got this real-world data. This is a human-computer interaction scenario where the student thinks he's coming in to put his resume online and to give us feedback on the usability. But unbeknownst to the student, we've made it a little frustrating. See if we can... Make the volume up, thank you. Yeah, so I think you heard him ask, do you mind looking at the camera and saying how we could improve this form? And he says, this form sucks. Now, this was a frustrating situation, and you saw him show a little bit of tension in his face. But to our surprise, here's another person in the same situation. Now look at, I'm going to play one more time, and I want you to watch the smile by his eye, not just his mouth. It comes up with that smile, 6 and 12. And now here, it's going to be very fast. There, see? And when you take just the still image of that, it looks like he's truly happy. In fact, even when you take the video without the context and people watch it and they see that, they think, he's really delighted. Not good. 90% of people showed this true smile when they were frustrated. And this wasn't just people at MIT, it was people in industry. And there's a paper of preschoolers using educational software, where not using computer vision, just using experts looking at it, they also found that the children were making this smile when they were failing while learning, as if they're trying to, cheer themselves up or look cute and adorable even when they're screwing up. Right? We don't know exactly why, that's future research. But we know that this is done a lot, and it doesn't mean you're happy. In our trying to teach computers how to do this, we here there's 4 different machine learning methods being compared to a human, and we trained and tested on different sets of data from delight and frustration smiles. And the computer does about as well as a human, who both do well on delight. Humans do not do well attributing these smiles to frustration. There's a bias against that, right? We think it means happy. But the computer is 92% accurate on this with the best machine learning algorithm here, and that was significantly better than the human. That does not mean that computers are better than people at recognizing facial expressions or emotion. Don't draw that conclusion. I think this audience is much smarter than that. But it does mean that on this very specific problem, the algorithm is behaving much better than the person. Now, that's just one example of a surprise. We learned also, though, that training machine learning to recognize emotion on the hundreds of examples we could get in our lab studies was, for smiles, you could get 90-something% accurate. But harder expressions like corrugator, where everybody has wrinkles, were very hard to get accurate when we just had lab examples. We knew that to really get the accuracy people wanted, in particular we were working with people on the autism spectrum who wanted their glasses to tell them somebody else's facial expression. In that real-world situation, we needed much better accuracy. We needed not hundreds of examples, but thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. We didn't know how many. And how are we going to get that? It was costing $1 million to do this study for autism with multiple sites and 500 examples. How are we ever going to scale to what we really needed? So Rana El-Kalyoubi, Dan McDuffin, I thought, well, what if we could get people online to turn on their cameras and watch content while it watches them, and we could elicit different emotions and have some subsets of that labeled. So here's data from the first time we ever tried this online. There were people in Finland who did this too. And what you see here is smile intensity, simple smile here. I'm curious how many of you had seen that before? Oh, wow, like everybody here. Okay, so it was as popular here as it was in the US. So this one out of the year in the US. On this purple graph are people who had never seen it before. The orange and the green are people who've seen it once before or multiple times. If you align these, you'll find that the people who had seen it before are smiling before the punchline. People seeing it for the first time smile slightly after they get it. This was interesting, not only because it showed people would opt in, turn on their cameras, and make facial expressions that we could record under terrible lighting conditions, but also that you could start to tell things like, not just if they were amused, but if they were amused before the funny part, they're probably enjoying watching it again, right? So it's giving you more affective information than just the response. Dan McDuff has taken this and built all kinds of analytics that then companies like Affectiva are now using. But back to our problem, which was, could we improve the accuracy? It went up significantly with more data. We didn't have to make the machine learning a whole lot better. We had to get a lot more data. And here, just using just a SVM RBF type method, there's a lot more to it you can find in our publications. We see that going an order of magnitude more in the data, 10x, 100,000 samples over here, that even this action unit between the eyes, this corrugator that's hard to recognize reliably when you're dealing with bad lighting and people logging in from home and wrinkles, that even that we were able to get more than 90% accurate on. I know there's some people here already using this SDK that Affectiva offers now, that now on over 24 expressions has more than 90% accuracy, and it's now validated in Brazil, China, Europe, India, a whole lot of different countries. We built it originally to try to help with our autism application. Now there are dozens of applications like that out there trying to help people recognize facial expressions. And just a plug for this, because it's free. If researchers want to use it, or small companies who are making less than $1 million a year want to use it, it's completely free to integrate. And now it's easy to integrate into mobile devices, Unity for VR stuff, all kinds of different platforms. But back to my autism story. So we were trying to help people with autism recognize the emotions of others. And one day, a friend with autism says to me, "Roz, you have it wrong. My biggest problem is not recognizing other people's emotions. It's you're not recognizing my emotions." And at first I felt terrible, right? Like, great, I didn't know I was that bad. I'm supposed to be good at this, but I'm not perfect. I have room to improve. And she says, "It's not just you, it's everybody. Everybody's not doing a good job recognizing our emotions." And I said, "Well, what emotions are we not recognizing?" And she said, "We're having huge anxiety and stress, and you're not getting it." I realized that we had been kind of neglecting this core state that for many people with autism, they could look very calm and detached outwardly, and yet inwardly they're so overactivated that they're just shutting down to cut out everything from the stimulation. So while this boy looked stressed on the outside, many people were very stressed on the inside and not showing it on the outside. So I thought back in our very early days of affective computing, where we had measured what we had called galvanic skin response, but later were corrected. When you measure this in a more rigorous scientific way, more properly, there's certainly been a lot of bad work done under the name GSR, but the scientists call this electrodermal activity. It's usually measured across the palm of the hand with a pair of electrodes, pass a small current or steady voltage, measure the one you didn't pass there, and measure its changes. That should go up with more sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight response or arousal. We started building it into different form factors that could see if we could get this data in a meaningful way while people left the lab, while they went about their normal activities, while a child was in school or on the playground, or a person was working at home and needed to be better understood, a non-speaking person. And so we found that we could get it in lots of atypical places, and I'm wearing two of the devices today that are both made by Empatica, the Embrace, and this is the Embrace, and the E4. And these were built to measure skin conductance in a clinical quality way, which, by the way, both now are certified medical devices in the European Union. But we also do much more than that. And this has other purposes. So just briefly mention this one that's used by a lot of researchers. Is measuring not only physical activity, 3-axis accelerometer, and temperature and skin conductance, but also blood volume pulse through photoplethysmography, which shines LEDs in and gets both a motion signal and a blood volume flow signal, which allows us to extract the heart rate, and when you're still, the heart rate variability. So when I stream this live, which you can see during the break or afterwards, and I'm moving around, the blood volume pulse is kind of noisy. The skin conductance tends to climb slowly, but when I hold still, the blood volume pulse starts to have a nice periodic signal from which you can extract from the peak-to-peak intervals, the interbeat intervals, the heart rate, and even the heart rate variability when the signal's clean. Why did we build that, or why did we want these two signals? The reason was, in stress, the two main components that we want to get at are this sympathetic nervous system fight or flight response and the parasympathetic rest and digest. And we usually estimate this from that careful frequency analysis of the interbeat intervals, and we estimate this from the skin conductance. Most organs in your body get innervated by both branches here, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. And by the way, there's a third branch, the enteric, that's also extremely interesting, which we're not measuring yet, but I'd love to. But the skin is the only organ we know of that gets the pure sympathetic. Now, when we were trying to get this with a lot of people with autism, one of the challenges we had was, especially with heart rate variability, was people didn't want to wear chest straps or electrodes on their chest. So we've worked a lot on non-contact ways to get this. And I didn't bring this slide, but one of the ways that was developed in my lab was the video-based reading of color changes from your skin to recognize your heart rate and respiration, and now heart rate variability using non-contact camera. We also more recently showed something else that I thought was surprising. I don't know how many people know about this yet, but this is a way. How many of you have your smartphone in your pocket right now? Okay, so right now, if you were running our software, you could do this without adding any new sensors to your phone. We asked if just the movement sensors in your smartphone could pick up your heart rate and respiration. And it turns out they can, while you're sitting and while you're doing lots of other things too, provided you're fairly still. So here the phone is in the pocket of the pants, and we're gonna look at the heart rate and the respiration. We're gonna compare it to gold standard measures of ECG on the chest and respiration using a chest sensor, both FDA cleared sensors. And we're going to look at the error of that comparison, and here across 12 people who were healthy in their 20s and 30s. The average error when you're lying down of your phone sensing your heart is about 1 beat per minute. And it's about 1/4 of a breath per minute when you look at the error of your respiration lying down. Now oh, that's sitting up. So right now, sitting up, it would be within about 1/4 of a breath per minute accuracy, estimating your breathing rate. The other positions are a little bit higher in error, but they're all still pretty low. The medical quality finger pulse sensors they'll slap on you in an ambulance are usually, PPG, usually within about 4 beats per minute error, and all of these are less than 4 beats per minute or breaths per minute, about 2. It's also surprising that some of us, like many of we women, I don't carry my phone on my body. It's in my bag, usually. And when it's in my bag, put it back there, and I have my bag against my body, then it can also work. So if I swing my bag, it doesn't work. But if I stand here like this, it's actually about 2.38 beats per minute error, sensing my heart rate, and about 2 breaths per minute error, sensing my breathing. Now, don't pay attention to the New York Times who's thought that it could still do it when it's sitting over there. This algorithm cannot, but there is another method coming that can. So stay tuned. It's also the case that when you are holding your phone and listening, it's very accurate. And also when you're touching and surfing, it's not very accurate. You can imagine, right? You're poking at it, you're hitting it with lots of other frequencies. Yes? It can work in lots of places. We've also published results when the movement detection is on the wrist. And you may have seen, like, sometimes it's like on the wrist, on the chest, which of course works well, but it also works fine when the wrist is away from the chest. Yeah, we haven't tried all the places, but it's certainly doable. So back to trying to get stress in normal ways without having to add special devices. We can do a lot better with heart rate and respiration now using just a motion sensor that is in contact with us. You don't need a chest sensor, you don't need an ECG. You can get the basic heart rate and breathing using just a motion sensor. That's not good enough yet for the heart rate variability and a lot of other interesting things you want to get from heart rate, but it is good enough for the basic heart rate. Now I'm going to talk some more about the electrodermal activity. The first time I ever saw skin conductance as electrodermal activities measure here for 24 hours a day, 7 days, was this data right here. And to my surprise, well, no surprise, you expect it to go up when people are activated, right? With cognitive load, emotional load, engagement, and we see it's really high for this lab, for this exam, for this MIT homeworks and problem sets. MIT homework's really hard here, lots of cognitive engagement, emotional engagement, stress, frustration. No surprise. To the embarrassment of we MIT professors, the low point, everyday classroom activity. This is why you really should interrupt with your questions or laugh, because those things make your levels go back up. Also very surprising was the biggest peak of almost every day was during sleep. Now, each day here is calibrated, normalized against itself, so it's quite different. Here it's 21 microsiemens, very high. Here it's 5 microsiemens. But this really surprised me. If you've been paying attention, you're probably going, huh? Like, didn't she say this was arousal? This is excitement? This is engagement? Like, why is this high during sleep? Why doesn't sleep look like classroom activity? Right? Nice and flat. Now, the first part of sleep does look like classroom activity. It tends to be flat when you start. But then it turns out when you go into deep sleep, not always, but many times you will see it start to rise like this. And this black fuzzy stuff is high frequency peaking. Now, we did a lot of experiments on what this is. I won't go into them all here. Point you to our publications list at the end if you want to read about them. But we didn't find it simply associated with stress or quality of sleep or things like that, or EEG arousals or bad dreams or scary dreams, none of those things. It's usually happening during non-REM sleep, usually during slow wave. The frequencies actually match those of some single neuron hippocampal recordings. And when we did studies of memory consolidation with Bob Stickgold, who's an expert on that, and we put people in a learning task where people study, they take the test, they sleep, they take the test after sleeping, and you compare their after-sleep score with their pre-sleep score, and we see who performed really well and who didn't perform well by learning during sleep. And we built a binary classifier to tell who was the best learners versus who were the worst learners. And we built the binary classifier using 6 different machine learning models here. And we built it with lots of different kinds of inputs. We built it with the electrodermal activity input, the red one here, with accelerometer input, with EEG, a whole bunch of different frequency channel inputs, with sleep staging, full polysomnography, staging wake, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, REM sleep, and then various combinations. All of these into the machine learning, only limiting the machine learning to EDA and accelerometer versus only limiting it to EEG, EDA, and accelerometer, leaving out the staging, other information. What model did best at recognizing if people learned? Well, usually, to our surprise, the red, which is just the EDA, and in one case, the purple, which was EDA coupled with the accelerometer on the wrist here. Now, I don't know about you, but I thought, this is kind of surprising. Like, why would a little bit of sweat, if you will, on the wrist, I thought of it kind of simply as like you sweat, you get more conductive. Why would that go up with learning? And we were measuring temperature, and it wasn't related to temperature. It's not like you were just getting hot and sweating during these stages of sleep. So we weren't quite sure what that is, but let me tell you some more stories, and I think we'll make more of a case for what we're now thinking about it might be. Now, back to the autism scenario. We wanted to give people the ability to see if somebody was getting increasingly autonomically aroused, so stressed that they might have a meltdown. And here's an example of one of those. I'm gonna mute this because you're gonna hear a meltdown. And here you could see the electrodermal activity streamed from 2 ankle sensors this girl is wearing that we built. It's been going up for a while. It's about to peak right here, and she's gonna have a meltdown. You can hear a little bit of it. Yeah. Oh, we just missed it. And the blue window up there, you can see some straight lines, which were our early Zigbee versions of the sensors that have some dropout. But the 2 ankles were streaming the data in a 1-minute wide zoom-in window that corresponds to this little blue zoom right here. So we could see in this case, before she had the meltdown, that it was building for quite some time. That does not mean she's going to have a meltdown, but it tells us that this probably was kind of a buildup in arousal preceding this event. In other cases, sometimes we'll see a person snap, and it's a very different kind of an onset. We can also see from watching her that, for example, when she relaxes in the ball pit for a long time, her levels go down. And when she swings with repetitive movement, which is what she's doing over here, we have a nice decaying exponential. The only other time I usually see that really nice decaying exponential is, unfortunately, in PowerPoint talks like this. Like, you're all probably having that nice decaying exponential right now, so I have to get you to laugh. All right, once we could get these data from people in active daily life while they were at home, at school, on the playground, I had a lot of people knock on my door and ask to borrow the sensor. And one day, and here's one of those sensors, it was a sweatband, and it had our hand-built electronics in it. And one day there was an undergrad who worked in my lab, and he came and knocked on my door and he said, "Professor Picard, could I please borrow one of your sensors? My little brother has autism. He can't talk, and I want to see what's stressing him out." And this was at the end of the semester, right before Christmas. And I said, sure, go ahead and take one. In fact, take two. And do you need a soldering iron? Because back then they broke all the time. And he said, no, I have a soldering iron. Good, MIT student can fix the sensors. So I sent him home with two sensors. I'm back at the media lab looking at the boys' data on my laptop. And I see this day, pretty normal, not very exciting. Next day, pretty normal, not very exciting. I go to the next day and my jaw drops. He's got the sensors on the left and the right wrist at the same time, and one of them is so high that I thought it must be broken. Like, we have stressed people out at MIT every way we can think of, and we've never seen data that high. And even weirder, the other side was not responding at all. Like, how is it that you can get stressed on one side of your body and not the other? So I thought that sensor must be broken too. And this is really weird. And even weirder, they both looked like they were working perfectly fine right before this point and right afterwards. In fact, there was a clear sleep signature in both of them afterwards. So I ran a bunch of experiments. I'm trained as an electrical engineer, and I tried to figure out what went wrong. And I could not come up with a good answer. So I did something I've never done before. I called the student at home on vacation. Hi, how's your Christmas? How's your little brother? Do you know what happened to him and I gave him the exact date and time in the weird data. And he says, I don't know. I'll check the diary. Diary? MIT student keeps a diary? I'm like, quick prayer, like, what are the odds this guy's written down this exact moment, right? He comes back, he has the exact date and time written down, he says, he checks it with me, and then he says, that was right before he had a grand mal seizure. Now, I didn't know anything about seizures, except false stuff I had heard as a kid, but I realized another student's dad was a brain surgeon who fixed the brains of people with epilepsy. So I called him up. Hi, Dr. Madsen, my name is Rosalind Picard. Do you know if it's possible for somebody to have a huge sympathetic nervous system surge? In this case, it looked like it was 20 minutes before the seizure, so I said 20 minutes before the seizure. And he said, probably not. But, he said, it's really interesting. We've had patients whose hair stands on end on one arm before a seizure. On one arm? I said, I didn't want to tell him it was one arm initially because I thought he'd hang up on me. And he got very interested. He said, yes, that can happen. You can have these regions in the brain trigger the events on just one side. We fast forward, we got approval to run 90 other patients, built more sensors, got them safety certified, went to the hospital with gold standard EEG, video, ECG, and now EDA, measured 24 hours a day of people in the epilepsy monitoring unit. So this is an hour, this is 24 hours here, and here's accelerometer data. You could see big accelerations here, here, and over here. But even bigger, you could see the electrodermal activity went super high. And red line moved a little bit, but the thickness of this red line is only minutes. The seizures are only a couple minutes wide, but the electrodermal activity is huge for sometimes 20, 30 minutes. Why is that? Was it because they were convulsing so much and they were getting really sweaty? We measured all that and it's not related to that. So what was causing this to get so big? And furthermore, just for scale, this is this boy's sleep. Remember how for the MIT students, sleep was usually the biggest peak of the day. So these are much bigger than this boy's sleep. Well, we were able to take the combination of the EDA and the accelerometer and build a more accurate seizure detector, and since then, Empatica has improved on this significantly, so this device now is running a much better seizure detector. But we still were trying to figure out the mystery of why these peaks are there. What does this mean? We thought this isn't matching our notion of electrodermal activity. Now, while trying to understand this, I learned some things I'm going to share with you very quickly here. One is that there is a risk of death after seizures, and in fact, it's the #2 cause of years of potential life lost among all neurological disorders. Very surprising. It's called Sudeps, sudden unexpected death in epilepsy. I'm curious if anybody here had heard of it before today. Nobody. It's surprising, because you've probably all heard of stroke, Lou Gehrig's disease, multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, meningitis, encephalitis. And this is bigger than all of those for taking away young lives. It's also the case that before a SUDEP happens, which is usually after the seizure, many minutes after the seizure, the brain waves go from being kind of crazy here across the EEG channels to being flat. And that post-ictal, generalized across all EEG channels, suppression is a biomarker for SUDEP. Usually it only happens for a short time usually it doesn't happen, and then sometimes it happens for a short time following a seizure, and in the case of SUDEP it becomes infinite duration. So I bring this up because it turns out that the longer these brain waves are suppressed, the bigger our signal on the wrist. Here's the first data we had from some children that were in a study, but this has now been replicated with adults and unfortunately also observed in a real-world SUDEP situation. So what we are finding is that something that is shutting down the cortex, making you look brain dead, is actually activating this electrodermal response on the wrist. So it's clearly not cortical activity. What could it be? Well, I again don't have time to go through the long version of this here, but let me tease you with a short version. Work of some neuroscientists, Mangina and Bougeron-Mangina, who were motivated by seeing electrodermal responses that were bigger on one side than the other for learning disabled children, went into the brains of epilepsy patients and stimulated separately different subcortical regions of the brain, and found that the electrodermal response was lateralized. So what do we have here? Red is the right skin conductance, blue is the left skin conductance, here measured on the palms, and when the right amygdala was directly stimulated, there was a big right skin conductance response and very little on the left. And similarly, when the left amygdala was stimulated, a big left skin conductance response and very little on the right. And this pattern holds for the anterior and posterior hippocampus and cingulate, regions of the brain very involved in emotion, memory, attention, and pain. Another fascinating finding is that if you go in the brain of a healthy person or a person with epilepsy and you stimulate the amygdala with a higher voltage and a higher frequency repeatedly, it turns off your breathing. So you could be sitting there typing, doing your email, letting somebody stimulate your amygdala, and you stop breathing, and you show no signs of distress. You're conscious, you're awake, you don't look like you're bothered in any way, you're just answering your email, no more than your email bothers you, and you stop breathing. And furthermore, as soon as they say your name or touch you or stimulate you, you start breathing again. Really bizarre. The amygdala is like a switch to turn on and off your breathing. Furthermore, it was learned that seizures could do this too. A seizure, like a little electrical fire, could spread to your amygdala and turn off your breathing. They've also noticed that the SUDEP, that #2 cause of years of potential life loss, of neurological diseases was happening when nobody was there most of the time. Very rarely do Sudeps happen when somebody's there. Usually it's when the patient is alone. And when somebody's there, they always touch you and stimulate you. So they now think that a lot of Sudeps, where they've observed the respiration stopping before the heart stops, might be a mechanism similar to this, that's activating a part of the brain, that turns off other parts of the brain, that turns off your breathing, and that surprisingly causes a big skin conductance response, which means that we can detect it. And so instead of a Sudep happening every 7 to 9 minutes, taking more lives every year than house fires, we might be able to prevent those deaths by alerting people to this event and bringing somebody to help. So that inspired Empatica to take our work in the lab and bring it out to the market. Yes, in the back? Yes. In fact, the epileptologists and the unexpected death in infants, or SID, sudden infant death syndrome for babies in the US, they think it might be the same mechanism now. So they're studying that there. So this led us to want to develop an alert system. And so we took all of our stuff at the lab at MIT, various homebrew versions of electronics, various tests we were doing in autism and epilepsy monitoring units, and built a device that could be able to run the machine learning and the alerting and the vibrotactile feedback, the skin conductance sensing, the movement sensing, all in one device. And that's the device I'm wearing here called Embrace. And we were also trying to make it so that it could not just look like a medical device, but be a smartwatch for people who don't have epilepsy. Because we understand a lot of us just want to monitor our sleep, our wake, our stress, our activity, and we don't want to have a device that's single purpose and stigmatizing for people who have to run an app for a medical condition. So you can run non-medical apps as well and get all this other fun stuff. And so here you can see the usual things you can see in consumer devices, but also there's a diary so you can track things like seizures. And we now have other people interested in looking at things like migraine or other kinds of pain and other events they want to track. And then associating that with what might be preceding those events. Now I should go back and say, when we found the peak in the first child 20 minutes before, we no longer think we can do it 20 minutes before. In the gold standard data, we're usually detecting at the moment of the electrical activity in the brain changing. We think the original was either an unusual situation, because we rarely see that now, or that the timing was off in the diary compared to what we had in the sensor, which is quite possible. So we're not claiming prediction right now. However, with the data that people think precedes their migraines or their seizures, the stress, the sleep, the physical activity, if it is possible to predict with these data, we are now enabling enough of the data to be collected that one could run these personalized machine learning algorithms. We've also gotten the kind of emails that make my skin conductance go up, and here's one of them. This came in my mail one morning from a mom who was in the shower, and her smartphone went off saying her daughter needed her. She runs out of the shower to check on her daughter, finds her daughter face down in bed, not breathing, blue, color of blue jeans, flips her over, and she starts breathing again. We're not able to say exactly what happened there, but we know that the mother says it was probably an interrupted Sudep. So we're very excited that this has the potential to get somebody there, but you have to get them there fast, within minutes. Ideally, we'd have a closed loop system, but we don't have that yet. We still rely on a person to get there. Now, I was scratching my head about this one day going, I'm really glad I had tenure when I started to realize there's something deep in the brain showing up on the wrist, right? This is pretty weird. Who would, seriously, you wouldn't take anybody seriously if they said they're reading deep brain stuff off the wrist, right? And so I had no idea why this would be correlated, and these correlations have been showing up in replicated studies and lots more. So I was remarking to a bunch of doctors about this, and they said, oh, Roz, it's easy. It's Medicine 101. We all learned in Medicine 101, and I never had Medicine 101, that we had 3 kinds of tissue when we were embryos. From the moment we were formed, one of those kinds of tissue, the ectoderm, knit together our brain, our spinal column, our whole neural system with the skin. Another kind of tissue formed the bones and the muscle, and another kind of tissue formed our soft organs. But the skin and the brain were woven together from the very beginning. So it's no surprise that a signal deep in the brain sends a signal that cannot be picked up on the surface of the brain. EEG can be flat, but it can be picked up on the wrist. All right, enough epilepsy right now. Let's get back to, enough neurology, let's get back to the emotion and the mood. One of my previous bosses at the Media Lab kept saying, yeah, Roz, I see all this math, this other stuff you do. Sure, but what we really need, what I really need, I need the mood ring that tells me my wife's mood before I go home. Like, okay, I'm not so sure you want that. If she knows you have that, she's going to expect chocolates, wine. Well, as we started thinking more seriously about mood, we realized this is a very serious, and sorry, this is the most depressing slide. I'll apologize for it up front. I'm going to give the US numbers. But let me give the World Health Organization numbers too. These are numbers everybody should know. By 2020, there's going to be one suicide every 20 seconds, not minutes, every 20 seconds. And by 2030, the #1 disease burden is not going to be cancer or stroke. There will not be as many people dying from war or accidents, car accidents or other accidents. But the #1 disease burden is going to be the death and disability from depression and suicide. And this is not just based on prediction from a very small recent blip, it's based on a long trend that has looked globally. And now I know this has been an issue in Finland. The World Health Organization report, I went back and looked at Finland before coming here, and they praised Finland. They said Finland was the only country that already had a plan for this at the time of the United Nations big report. Finland was ahead of everybody else, so congratulations to you. That's the good news. The bad news is you had some of the highest rates. The good news is in the last 15 years, your rates have reduced a lot more than your rates have gone down a lot while the United States has gone up, but your rates are still higher than the United States. So we all need to do better. And we're thinking about this because we at MIT and many universities in the US, and even the large best companies that you want to work at are having this problem, are having very high rates of these tragedies. So in our approach to this, we are saying, gosh, you know, we can get so much data now that might help us understand not just how to treat depression, but how to prevent depression. We can get all kinds of measurements we're relating now to changing mood. Over 1 billion samples per year of people sleeping, waking, exercise, light exposure, stress, texting behavior, social interaction through phone and proximity, and geolocation, movement. You know, are you going from getting around campus every day to staying stuck in your apartment? And how do those patterns change with the weather and with everything in the time of year and the day of week and other contextual information? And can we not only detect when you're in trouble, but can we forecast while you are still well what your mood is likely to be tomorrow night? What if you knew your mood tomorrow night was going to be really bad? Might you actually be able to do something to change it? Which makes it hard for us to tell you our forecast was accurate, but wouldn't you rather prevent it from getting bad? So the science is a bit harder to do, but that's never scared us away. And we are now building prediction algorithms that take your personal data from groups of people like you, and data from everybody we can get who opts in, and trying to help you learn what you're doing in your life that's making you feel better, and what you're doing in your life that's making you more likely to do worse. And the ones we just published at the NIPS Machine Learning for Health conference are in the mid 80% recognition accuracy on holdout set of data. Yes? Yeah, right, and we just record it later, yeah. There's always this challenge between measuring and not intervening, although even a measurement can be a kind of an intervention, and intervening when you worry that somebody's in trouble. So it does make the science a lot harder, though, yeah. All right, I'm getting near the end. 2 more slides. This is a conceptual diagram. While I've been giving you a lot of real data, this is not the real data. This is, imagine the 700 things we're measuring that relate to you doing well, and they're rolled up here in a score, and you've just been admitted to the university, or you've just started that great job, or you've just hired this fabulous new grad student, and they're doing great, they're positive, healthy, and over time, they come in, and they're in the right place, and they do even better. It's really good. But we all know we hit a lot of major stressors, and everybody takes a bit of a dip. But they still look like they're doing okay. But at MIT, and at a lot of places now, 25% to a third of students are getting depressed, and they're getting vulnerable, and they're not doing well. And sometimes they don't notice, they're not aware that they're in trouble. I've seen cases where a person comes out of the hospital, they were in very bad shape, but the day before they went in, they said they were fine. Their roommate took them to the hospital, and they were practically catatonic. They were unable to function, and yet they weren't aware that they were sliding down that curve. They had none of that self-awareness. So often it's too late when you're down here, and it's very hard to treat. And while we have we have 5 different studies now with Harvard Medical School and Mass General Hospital trying to treat people who are down here and get them back up, what we really want to do is find out when you're at the top, are you on the blue path or on the red path? Before it becomes very clear that you're on the red path. And then can we, by detecting that early, could we prevent 80% of depression? I think it might be possible. And the reason is, so much of it depends on our behavior. If we could understand which behaviors, and it's a complicated set of causal events that work together, but it's a nice math problem to solve. If we could put them together and start to learn that you're getting a little weak on 3 of the 7 that are most important to you, before you have any outward signs, and you could fix that before you are in trouble, then we might be able to prevent that. And we're already seeing in studies, for example, of people who are depressed. In one study where 20 people were waitlisted for a depression trial, and they were also bad sleepers in this case, they gave them cognitive behavioral therapy on their sleep, and then 18 of the 20 after 6 weeks no longer qualified for the depression trial. So in that case, 18 out of 20's depression was fixed by fixing their sleep. Now we could have detected the bad sleep quite a while before, and the chronic buildup of that, and the way that that influences. And we are finding at MIT, the regularity of your sleep is a huge factor in stress and depression. So that's not the only factor. There are some people with regular sleep who still get depressed, but it is a big factor that affects a lot of people. So, and it's fixable. All right, to wrap up, I've taken you on a big story adventure of a lot of different things. I started with reading facial expressions and a surprise that the true smile does not mean that you're truly happy. Learning from people with autism that even though many of us think we can read people outwardly if they're stressed or not, we're actually not very good at it, and we often misread them. Trying to develop less traditional ways to measure things like heart rate and respiration. We found that using low-cost motion sensors that are already in watches and smartphones or eyeglasses, we've shown to, can accurately read heart rate and respiration when you're still. We've been learning a lot about electrodermal activity in real life and surprising associations of it with sleep memory consolidation. I think that study should be replicated, though. That one is one of the ones I've mentioned that has not been replicated yet. The neurological and physiological connections now. We're very excited about studying more, and I'm excited to be here where you guys are measuring lots of modalities in the brain and on the body jointly, because we think now that each dermatome may be more informative than we thought before. It is not a simple left-right thing. It turns out the cortex maps bilaterally, these limbic regions map ipsilaterally, motor maps contralaterally, and these change in different dermatomes. It's not as simple as left equals left and right equals right. There's a lot more work that needs to be done to map this out. And we're now associating that with different imaging, what imaging studies have shown with fear and anxiety and stress, and repeating a lot of those studies now looking at the physiological biomarkers. And this also now has the potential practically to get out there and we hope make a significant difference in the lives of people with neurological disorders like epilepsy. And hopefully in the future, hopefully we might be able to, using just the stuff we carry around and wear today, learn better how to stay well, how to do the things that lead people to stay on that blue path and not do the things that lead you into trouble when the major stressors hit. So thank you very much, and I'll be happy to take some questions.
Okay, I think it's best if you ask for your turn, and I'll bring the microphone to you, and you can then use these other microphones. Okay, who wants to go first?
Okay, I'm a retired professor from the computer science department, but I have been now about 15 years looking at animals, and so I have been thinking that we perhaps with some techniques might go inside their brains, their cognitive and emotional abilities. What do you think? It is a difficult task, of course, but can you apply these to animals? Social animals, I am thinking about.
Social animals. Is this on now? Can you hear? Yeah. The work with monkeys has looked at things like the electrodermal activity and the heart rate variability, and there we have. That's better, thanks. All right, yay, that works. Working with Anne Graybill and some of her monkeys at MIT, where they've got implants in the basal ganglia, we did concurrent physiological measures there. And there you can get a signal that the intuition we have on humans seems to map in the little bit of work we've done there, but we haven't done anywhere near as much work. The monkeys tend to claw off the sensors, so you have to, like we're putting them on the ankles and they're in little cages and they're really limited in the range of experience they can get. But increasingly, people, they're even finding non-invasive ways, without the craniotomy to go in and put electrodes on the hippocampus and all now. So increasingly, we can start to measure more of these brain events concurrent with the physiology and try to map it so that one, of course, wouldn't have to have these invasive procedures. But I haven't done other animals. But the pet food people would like us to. They want to know what their dogs and cats and all are feeling. I don't know how we're doing for time either. Tell me. Yeah, okay.
I think this is very nice looking at about the thing that this kind of mental disorders are 80% of the kind of a casualty game, and if there's something that we could do for them. Mm-hmm. I was wondering though in the psychological part of that, so if you are feeling very bad and then there's a wrist device that is saying that you are going to feel even worse, so how can you change the behavior in that situation? So.
Yeah, great question. Most of us don't want to be told when you're at peak stress, gee, Roz, your stress is a 9, right? That doesn't help. So my students and I are working on better ways to handle that. And that's a research question, right? How do you help? And it may be very personal how you want to be informed. Ideally, it would be more like a personal weather forecast where it's more about keeping the weather good. And it's making recommendations where, like with homeostasis, you're in a region, like a good operating region for you. And it's telling you more when you're in your good operating region versus when, too many of your parameters are going out of whack and you might want to start making up for some of them. I think there will be different metaphors, different ways to describe it to a person like you or me versus your average person on the street who might, just want their best friend to call them and cheer them up, right? It's going to be complicated. There will be a lot of things. Just like there are a lot of things we're measuring, there will be a lot of ways to intervene. And the machine learning is going to have to work on both ends of that to figure out what's helpful.
Hey, thanks. It's a great work. It's nice to see this working in really real-life scenarios. I was wondering, a lot of the work now relies on repetitive patterns that you can, for example, if we look at the sleep pattern or patterns that you need to observe again and again to actually make to build up some understanding of the person. But I was wondering, do you think that you can actually detect almost like a traumatic or fast responses that might cause the mood of the person go down or up, instead of having to measure over weeks and then maybe after 4 weeks say, okay, now you're going down, instead of saying, okay, now something happened and you should actually pay attention immediately? Is this a kind of a sensor that or machine learning models that you're developing that could do this, or do you see that it's evident that we have to observe longer term behavior before being able to do this?
Yeah, it's hard. As we know, emotions can change very short term, right? You get into the university, or you get your paper rejected, or you graduate, the happiest day at MIT, the most smiling, even the parents, because they're not paying the bill anymore. So there's some that are predictable and quick, very based on circumstances, right? You can look at the calendar, graduation, we predict there will be a lot of happy people. But then if somebody walks in and they're not happy, you're like, what happened? So for an individual, it's more than just the physiology, right? We have to look at a lot of things. But for our work, we're not focused on predicting that short-term emotion, although we want to detect those, because if you have a lot of little happy things, your mood is likely to get better. And if you have a lot of upsetting things, it's likely to get worse. But it is, we're looking more for your inherent resilience, right? How kind of strong are you so that if a bad thing happens, are you likely to just feel bad for a little while and bounce back? Or are you likely to really begin not thinking about anything good again, right? And for example, when your sleep is really screwed up, you're much more likely to get stressed and irritable by little things, and little negative things are likely to build on each other more. So that's a contributing factor that lowers your whole ability to deal with the onsets. So while we may or may not detect a particular onset, we may detect that your ability to deal with them is getting worse.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I'm Pia Tikka from Aalto University. Very exciting and inspiring. This is just a trivial question about the first experiment with the video and looking at the emotional expressions. So I was wondering how much do you see that these smiles are kind of social smiles? Are these people in the experiment, are they aware that they are being video recorded?
Yeah. Actually, we've done some work on social smiles versus not, and they do tend to look a little different. In the online, when people are using their webcam video, we actually found that when they were home alone, we saw more expressiveness, especially more negative expressiveness, whereas I know in Finland you don't show a whole lot of expression, right? I probably show a lot as an American, or so you say. But you go home and you do, right? But I had a nanny who was very expressive at home, and she came into the lab to help us test an early system. I thought, oh, she'll show a lot of expressions. She got in front of the computer and showed nothing. She was like a brick wall. I was stunned. She felt she was being watched. right? But what we've found when people are at home and they're opting in and they're getting comfortable, and you will see them in their bed or on their sofa or in their kitchen, and you see just much more facial expressiveness than what we usually show each other. I could show you some examples later, and it's very eye-opening, and a lot more negativity. People who don't like things, adults who don't, like we're all taught not to show if we don't like stuff. They're showing it. It's a lot of it. Mm-hmm. Over here.
Hi, thanks for the talk. So there was a recent result in cerebral cortex from Aalto University here that showed that you could use multivariate pattern matching in fMRI data to classify emotions from multiple voxels. And I was wondering if you think that this kind of an approach would also map to external measurements, so non-imaging measurements, so the kind of thing that you're doing, psychophysiology from the whole body, perhaps multiple modalities, because maybe such activations in the brain would result in a kind of characteristic pattern across the whole physiology.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's an empirically testable question. I wish I knew the answer. I think people should get the data and see. Because it may be that our smart clothes of the future, could be reading a lot of different information than what we thought. As you heard, when we first started with skin conductance, we thought it was just a general arousal sweat response, right? We didn't realize that it would be meaningful in different places. Actually, the Indian medicine people, the Chinese medicine people, they're all like, oh, no surprise, we know there are all these different regions. And I've been talking with surgeons with the different neurological mappings too, and it's complicated. They're not the same from your left to your right or across people. So it may need to be found more empirically on people what is repeatable and reliable and significant. But finding it in the brain, if that holds up, and continues to in a generalizable way, is suggestive that we will be able to find it elsewhere in the body as well.
Thank you for the fascinating talk. I'd go back to the stress and depression and those studies, and I'm wondering if there's a feedback loop back to the cause of the major stressors, which is usually life and society and work or studies. So is there a feedback from your research to, let's say, shaping the student life in MIT to be such that it's less likely to cause these kind of downward slopes, or to, let's say, people who are shaping work life and work-life balance and these kinds of things?
Yes, in fact, MIT started a new effort called Mind, Hand, Heart. The motto of MIT was mind and hand, and recently they've said, gee, the mind works better if you add emotion in, right? So you're more intelligent. So we are, with that effort, looking at everything across the lifestyles in campus and work with companies to do this too. Things like, we would have faculty have homeworks due at 3 a.m., and we're like, maybe that's not a good idea. Do you guys know why they call midnight? It's the middle of the night. Chuck Seisler told me that. He's a sleep expert who does the sleep coaching for the top athletes in the NBA and the NFL and top soccer athletes and and NASA and places like that. It turns out that if you not only sleep regularly, but sleep like with the darkness and lightness patterns, there's some signs that is healthier for your mental health. The regularity is mapping to the mental health. So go to bed earlier, sleep longer in the winter. I mean, we're getting the data now to test if this is really true. If it's not just what our mothers told us, or we mothers should tell our children. It's like we don't believe it until we see the data, right? And also, I don't believe it if I see the data published on a group of people. I want to see the data for me, right? Maybe it matters for them, but it doesn't matter for me, right? So we want to take what's learned from the best science, but also see when does it work for one individual and not another, right? Because I don't know about you, I don't want to go to bed early unless I have to, right? So it's, but I do want my brain to work well, right? And I want to feel good. So, and I want to stay that way even when things get tough. So does that mean I should go to bed a little earlier? You know, and let midnight be the middle of the night?
I should also point out that in Finland, going to sleep when it gets dark in the winter is not only...
I know, at MIT, the average bedtime is like 1 or 2 a.m., yeah.
Okay, we have time for 2 more questions. I think there's one here and then another there, and then we'll have cocktails, okay?
Hey, thank you. I was wondering if there has been conducted or is ongoing some research that combines this approach to researching chronic pain.
Yeah, there are not a lot of results yet, although we're doing more now. We've done a bunch of acute pain studies that are not published yet, but hopefully will be soon. And we're doing now more chronic pain in migraine and in multiple sclerosis. So stay tuned, it will come, but it's a complicated area, very important area.
Yeah, thank you very much for the talk, very exciting. I would be interested in if you ever thought or conducted any research how these signals and the sleep schedule, for example, depends on the environment around us and the environmental changes. For example, when I am traveling, my general feeling changes and my thoughts and also my sleeping schedule might change. Personally, I was talking about me, and I was thinking that maybe these signals might differ also culturally speaking, or not culturally, but like the environment around us. People maybe tend to have the same problems and the same signals in their body and in their schedule. Do you think this would be interesting to research or think about?
Yes, it's a very interesting area. There are, I guess, a couple things that come to mind. One is the social environment. And in our snapshot study I mentioned there with all those things we were measuring, we are recruiting people in social groups. So we're measuring not only each individual, but we're measuring their social cohorts and also building models of their influence on each other. So don't have published results on that yet. And it's actually kind of hard to get significant data because of the extra size of the interactions. But we are expecting there to be significant influence there. There's also the direct environmental influences. You know, they can see, you know, if a little sound happens, you startle. My sensor, I can see what time my husband comes to bed from my sensor. You know, oh, you were up till 1:30 last night. You know, what time did you come to bed? Oh, I think it was a half hour later. You know, so it's kind of the case where you could see the perturbation on other people of sounds, interruptions, and lights also. We think that's a particularly important area to study in environments with low socioeconomic status, like children in homes where parents are working night shifts, or they're in an environment in a neighborhood that's poor and noisy, or there's violence or disruption or yelling or loud TV. Those kinds of things can impact the sleep, which then could impact the learning and their stress and their mood and their ability to do well in school. So all of those environmental influences could lead to a worse outcome for somebody in that environment.
So I would like to thank the audience, even before anything else, because I found your questions really showed that the talk was very, very well received and inspirational. And thank you very much, Professor Rosalind Picard, for having visited us. I think it was really beyond expectation. The talk was fantastic. Thank you. And now we can celebrate and gracefully go into the weekend. We have some sparkling wine and then something small to eat for all of you to mingle.